Undercover boss orders breakfast at Cafe freezes when waitress says she hasn't eaten in 2 days. Some things only reveal themselves when you stand in the right place and stay silent long enough to truly listen. The sky was still faintly gray. The pavement was damp with night mist. A chill wind swept through, shaking the leaves outside the cafe, as if to greet the first customer of the day. Miles Donovan, 50 years old, CEO of the New Dawn Cafe chain, gently tugged the brim of his cap lower as he stepped off the wet sidewalk and into the shop. A worn gray coat draped over a simple outfit made him look no different than a working-class man stopping by for a quick morning bite. No one recognized him, and that was exactly what he wanted. The cafe was quiet. Soft yellow light from the ceiling spilled over the dark wood counter. A small old radio behind the bar played a mellow jazz tune. The mingled scent of weak coffee and burnt toast pulled him back to memories of when he first started pushing a coffee cart along the city curb 15 years ago. He chose the window seat, where he could quietly observe the entire cafe. He ordered a simple breakfast, sunny side-up eggs, toast, and a black coffee, not for taste, but to justify lingering longer. This location, according to reports, was stable, steady revenue, no complaints from guests or staff. But in the past few weeks, a few anonymous letters had reached the headquarters. Nothing accusatory, nothing hostile. Just handwritten notes telling the story of someone who worked nonstop, yet whose name never showed up on the tip-sharing board. Miles didn't rush to verify. He chose the oldest and truest method to uncover what was being hidden. Return as a guest. Observe as a stranger. And listen as he did in the early days. There are words that don't need to be shouted, but once you hear them, you can't pretend you haven't. The breakfast plate was placed before him, 2 sunny side-up eggs, a slice of over-toasted bread, and a steaming cup of black coffee. Lana, the young waitress, gently bowed as she set it down, saying nothing, offering only a polite smile before stepping away. Miles watched his gaze steady and quiet, never judging. The girl was so slender that her shirt collar hung a bit loose, as if the garment had been sewn for someone stronger. But Lana's movements were precise, swift, but not hurried, like someone long accustomed to exhaustion, yet careful not to show it. He initiated conversation. No pressure, no probing, just a gentle question enough to open a door. Morning shift must bring in some decent tips, huh? Lana paused slightly. She didn't look up. She simply shook her head, her voice barely louder than the soft jazz playing in the background. I haven't eaten since the day before yesterday. I have to save money. Each morning, I only dare drink water. Miles didn't respond right away, but his hand slowed as it held the coffee cup. He used to think the worst-case scenario was staff being dissatisfied with company policy. But now he saw something worse. Someone working hard, not having enough to eat yet still smiling and pushing through. Her words not long, not angry, not resentful. But they tore through the polished reports and struck directly at what he had once believed was stability. A kind person going hungry under a system he himself had built. Injustice doesn't always scream in crowds. Sometimes it lies silent behind a misprinted name. Miles stayed longer than planned. Not for the breakfast, but for every small action that was quietly redrawing the outline of truth. He ordered another coffee just to have a reason to linger. And he observed, Lana worked nonstop, greeting new guests whenever the door chimed softly, carrying trays, wiping tables, pouring water, all done swiftly yet gently. Each time a customer tipped via card, she smiled and thanked them, then quickly turned away, as if not expecting anything. But Miles noticed something that perhaps Lana had gotten so used to, she no longer saw it. The name Lana never appeared on any receipt. Every transaction recorded in the POS was tied to one single name, Kyle M., the young man who had stood behind the register since opening crisp shirt, earbuds in, scanner in hand. He hadn't left the counter once, hadn't delivered food, hadn't wiped a table, yet every single tip flowed to him. 8 and 16, table 2, 3.75 tip, Kyle M. 842, table 5, 400 tip, Kyle M. 7, table 3, 2.25 tip, Kyle M. Near the end of the morning shift, as Lana stepped into the back to get water, Miles followed. His voice was soft, almost casual. Do you remember all the tables you've served this morning? Lana froze for a moment, then nodded gently. She pulled from her apron a small notebook, its pages yellowed, the edges curled with time. Inside, rows of neatly handwritten entries, clear and meticulous. 748, table 1, $2.5. 825, table 4, $3. 858, table 6, $4.25. System log, Kyle M. The final page, written in red ink, with one line underlined, total 423.75 over 3 weeks. Lana didn't complain, didn't accuse. She simply said, I don't have access to the POS. Only the person at the counter gets an ID, but I write it down to remind myself I was here. Miles held the notebook, feeling his throat tighten. Not because of the numbers, but because of the silence of someone trying to hold on to fairness in the only way she had left. By recording, so she wouldn't feel invisible. And in that moment, he understood this wasn't a system error. It was a deliberate choice, a silent collusion between power and the silence forced into submission. Silence doesn't mean there's nothing to say. It means that in some places, speaking up equals being erased from every list. And they're saying, Miles didn't leave right after the conversation. He ordered another coffee to go and stood near the door, where he could see both the POS counter and the service floor. And then he saw what no report had shown. A middle-aged customer paid at table 4. Lana bowed and thanked them. A few minutes later, the POS screen showed table 4, 3.75 tip, Kyle M. Kyle had never touched that table, didn't know what the customer had ordered. Yet he was the one recorded as receiving the tip. A different employee just starting the afternoon shift whispered to Lana, don't ask too many questions. Kyle's management's guy. It wasn't said as a threat, but it was enough to make Lana pause. Miles heard it clearly, and he knew this was no longer a mistake. This was a structured hierarchy, where getting your name shown was a privilege, not a default. And people like Lana, no matter how much they did, could be erased from the system with a single denied ID. At the end of the shift, as Lana bid farewell to the last customer, she slumped into the wall-side chair, unscrewed the lid of her water bottle, and took a quick gulp. No food, no laughter, just exhaustion compressed beneath a faded apron. Miles didn't walk over. He just watched and silently wondered, how many more Lanas are quietly surviving in this system just to keep someone else's name showing up every day? In the notebook Lana held next to all the old figures was a blank page, nothing written on it. But to Miles, that blank page was the very thing that woke him up. Because when a worker has to handwrite proof of their existence, the system has clearly stopped being run by a heart. A system has no right to make someone invisible just because they're not on the list of chosen ones. 9:03 a.m., exactly 1 week later. No more disguise, no more weathered coat or low-capped hat. Miles Donovan walked into the suburban branch of New Dawn Cafe in a simple suit, neatly combed silver hair, and the silence that carried the weight of an oncoming storm. No one in the cafe recognized him until he walked straight to the counter. Kyle was there still in his crisp white shirt, headset on, fingers gliding across the POS like a model floor coordinator. The shift manager, Miss Sienna, was seated in the back checking delivery logs, not looking up, not paying attention to who just walked in. Miles said nothing. He pulled a USB drive from his coat pocket and plugged it directly into the POS system. The pause screen immediately switched. Footage from the ceiling camera, Lana carrying a tray, bending down to serve table 6. The customer pulls out a card and leaves a tip. A few seconds later, Kyle approaches the POS, inputs the details, confirms the transaction. Screen shows, table 6, 500 tip, Kyle M. Lana wasn't recorded. Again. Next scene, audio from the break room. Miss. Sienna's voice came through, calm and flat like a policy manual being read aloud. Only those with an approved ID get to receive tips. No ID, no chance. The system doesn't make mistakes. The atmosphere in the cafe fell still. Lana, carrying a tray of water, froze. Her hand tightened around the edge of the tray. A few customers put down their knives and forks, turning to look at the screen. The kitchen staff stood in silence. Zach was no longer as composed as usual. Miles turned to Kyle, his voice not raised, but loud enough for everyone to hear. You've stood here all morning, served not a single table, yet you've received every tip. And you, he looked at Sienna, were given the power to run things fairly, but you used it like a door locking out the people who actually do the work. A single nod. 2 envelopes from HR were immediately delivered. Kyle Marshall, termination of employment, effective immediately. Sienna Clark, revocation of managerial authority, temporary suspension pending full investigation of her shifts. Finally, Miles inserted another small device into the POS system. The screen lit up with a scrolling message. Tip, system live, real-time vertical bar, link to server, vertical bar, public display. He turned back, facing the entire staff and the customers who were still silently watching. From today, every tip transaction will display the actual server's name. No more pre-approved IDs. No more needing to handwrite your presence to prove you were here. And no more of a kind person going hungry just because they weren't chosen to be seen. Sunlight touched the front window, reflecting the newly lit message. Tip system live. A system just corrected, not by software, but by a promise that no one would disappear in the very place they've helped keep alive. A round of applause rang out small, but clear from a table near the window. It was the elderly gentleman in a dark suit who had been quietly following the scene from the beginning. That clap sparked a ripple. A student stood up, nodding gently toward Lana. A young mother turned to her son and whispered, "That's the one who truly deserves it." Lana stood still. She didn't smile, but her eyes were wet, shining, like someone being called by name for the first time in the voice of justice. At that same moment, in the back room, two other employees, Tomas and Aisha, stood quietly watching the message on the system monitor. Tomas exhaled, as if releasing a burden. Finally, we don't have to hide receipts anymore. Aisha, the one who had once been told to temporarily hold the tips because she didn't have an ID yet, quietly unlocked her phone and sent a message. "Things have changed. You can come back if you want." How? On his way out of the cafe, Miles stopped in front of the bulletin board. He pulled from his inside pocket a printed sheet bolded with the heading, "Training Notice. Starting next week. New tip distribution. Access rights training session. Instructor, Lena M., former server, now Regional Operations Coordinator. Topic, how to keep a system from erasing its people." Miles posted the notice on the board, not with a pushpin, just a piece of clear tape, but enough to fix something in place. From now on, Lana wouldn't just be named. She would be the one teaching the system how to relearn itself. Inside, the tip data kept updating. Debble 3, 2.75 tip. Lana M, Dibble, 7.0 tip. Thomas R, Table 5, 350. Tip Aisha K. No more errors. No more impersonation. Only presence and transparency as it should be. Miles walked out of the cafe without looking back, because he knew from that very morning a small cafe had become the birthplace of an old philosophy, one that never goes out of style. Justice doesn't arrive through executive orders. It takes someone once made invisible brave enough to rise up, so the entire system must come into focus again. Respect isn't a reward. It's how a system proves it still deserves to exist. 1 month later, New Dawn Cafe, the forgotten regional branch in internal reports, is now the first to implement the new system. The POS screen behind the counter updated in real time. A table 2, 325 tip Andre. Opine, table Pime, 4.150 tip Lana. 8, 45, table 6, 2,7, 5 tip Mireille. No more default names. No one had to handwrite each line just to remind themselves they existed. Lana no longer wore a server's apron. She now sat in a small meeting room at a newly opened branch, facing a group of trainees. In her hand, an old notebook, now recovered in soft leather, with a label on the edge that read, "Proof of what was once right but forgotten." She opened to the last page and pointed to a line in red ink. Total, 423.75. 3 weeks. This is the amount I didn't receive. But what I lost more than money was the feeling that the system even saw me. A brief silence. Then she spoke, not to stir anger, but to pass on resolve. If one day the system doesn't call your name, then work clear enough and true enough that it can no longer stay silent. Another morning, at the table by the window where Miles had once silently watched Lana's very first morning shift, no more hat to cover his face, no more reason to hide, just a plate of pancakes, a black coffee, and a neatly folded $20 bill placed beneath a handwritten note. "Thank you for holding on to what's right, even when it meant you had to go hungry." Lana found the note after her shift. She folded it carefully and tucked it between the pages of her notebook, right where that red ink line had once been, not to keep as evidence, but to remember. Justice doesn't come from a paycheck. It comes from someone daring to do what's right, even when it brings nothing but an empty stomach. A week after that training session, Lana received an email from headquarters. It wasn't a memo, and it wasn't praise either, but it was an invitation from Miles Donovan himself. "We are rewriting the entire internal training program, and I want the very first lesson to begin with your story." 3 weeks later, at the third-floor auditorium headquarters of New Dawn Cafe, beneath the soft lighting, the rows of seats were filled with people Lana once thought she'd never get to stand in front of. Regional managers, area supervisors, HR advisors, all silent, attentive. She didn't use slides, no whiteboard. Just pulled out her familiar notebook, now weathered with age, wrapped in a plain leather cover with 3 embossed words, Work, worth, witness. Lana spoke, not reading a speech, not trying to move anyone. At some point, I thought this system didn't see me. But today I stand here not to repeat what went wrong, but to make sure no one will ever have to handwrite proof of their existence again. She paused, looked each person in the eye, then nodded. If a data line can erase a human being, then a human being must be the one to rewrite that line. At the outskirt branch, this morning the cafe was busier than usual. People lined up not just for coffee but to witness a shop rebuilt on trust. Display screen shows 0743, table 18, Pime, tip, Lana, Aaron 759, table 4, 2.25 tip, Aaron. Table 332 tip, Lucas. Below, a small subtitle ran across the screen. Every effort seen, every name respected. Miles Donovan sat by the window like the very first time. In front of him, a plate of pancakes, a cup of black coffee, still warm. But this time, he didn't leave anything beneath the plate. She simply looked up at the POS screen, where the names of each server now appeared clearly, at the right moment, with the right person, and smiled. A new system doesn't begin with algorithms. It begins with a girl who once went hungry but refused to be invisible. Kindness is not a luxury. It is the final rein keeping a system from veering off its own path. Because a system is only truly fair when the brave ones who uphold what's right are no longer alone, but become the trailblazers, so those who come after them can be seen from the very start.